picture this. December 19th, 1903. It's freezing cold in New York City. Snow falls on the East River. A man in a top hat stands on a brand new bridge. His name is Seth Lowe, and he's the mayor. Behind him, thousands of people wait. They're shivering. They've been waiting for hours. Mayor Lowe raises his hand. The crowd goes quiet. "I declare this bridge open," he shouts. The crowd roars. People rush forward. They run across the bridge, laughing and crying. Mothers push baby carriages. Old men lean on canes. Everybody wants to be among the first to walk from Manhattan to Brooklyn without taking a boat or traveling all the way up to the older Brooklyn Bridge. Newspapers call it the People's Bridge. They say it will help poor families. It will let workers get to their jobs faster. It will connect two parts of the city that need each other. But here's what the newspapers don't talk about much that day. The blood. 7 years earlier, in 1896, the first workers arrived at the East River. They came from Italy, from Ireland, from Poland, from Russia. Most of them couldn't speak English. Most of them had never built a bridge before. The city hired them because they were cheap. The city could pay them less than American workers. And if they got hurt, there were always more immigrants getting off the boats. Between 1896 and 1903, more than 100 workers were seriously injured building the Williamsburg Bridge. At least 6 died, probably more. Nobody kept perfect records of dead immigrants. Some fell from the towers. Some got crushed by falling steel. Some got burned by red-hot rivets. Some got their hands mangled in machinery. Some breathed in so much bad air in the underground work that their lungs gave out years later. The bridge cost $24 million to build. That's about $850 million in today's money. City leaders said they built it cheap. They said they saved taxpayers money. They were proud of this. But they saved money by skipping safety equipment. They saved money by hiring the cheapest workers. They saved money by working men 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They saved money by rushing the job, cutting corners, ignoring dangers. 100 years later, in 2003, engineers looked at the Williamsburg Bridge. They said it was falling apart. The city needed to spend $1 billion to fix it. $1 billion. The cheap bridge wasn't cheap after all. This is the dark story of the Williamsburg Bridge. It's a story about building something beautiful with blood and broken bones. It's a story about who we remember and who we forget. It's a story about what happens when you build something cheap, deadly, and supposedly built to last. Here's a question for you. When you cross a bridge, do you ever think about the people who built it? Do you ever wonder what happened to them? Most of us don't. We just drive across or walk across or take the train across. The bridge is just there. It's always been there, we think, but somebody built it. Lots of somebodies. And for the Williamsburg Bridge, many of those somebodies paid with their health, their bodies, sometimes their lives. This bridge is 73.8 feet long. That's almost a mile and a half. It has 2 towers, each 335 feet tall. That's as tall as a 30-story building. Between 1903 and 1908, it was the longest suspension bridge in the world. To build it, workers had to dig deep holes in the riverbed. They had to sink massive foundations underwater. They had to climb hundreds of feet in the air on thin platforms. They had to catch red-hot rivets thrown through the air and hammer them into place while the metal was still glowing. They did all this without harnesses, without hard hats, without safety rules. When the Williamsburg Bridge opened, Mayor Seth Lowe gave a speech. He talked about progress. He talked about connecting communities. He talked about the greatness of New York. He didn't talk about Giuseppe Morti, who fell from the Brooklyn Tower in 1900 and died when he hit the ground. He didn't talk about the Irish worker who got his arm ripped off by a cable in 1902. He didn't talk about the Polish man who drowned in the river when his platform collapsed in 1898. This is their story, too. This is the story behind the celebration. This is what it really cost to build the People's Bridge. Chapter 1. The vision. WHY New York needed another bridge. 900 words. In 1895, New York City had a problem. Actually, it had lots of problems, but one of the biggest was this. You couldn't get from Manhattan to Brooklyn easily. Well, you could take a boat. Ferries ran back and forth across the East River all day and all night. But ferries were slow. Ferries got stuck in ice in winter. Ferries couldn't carry enough people. Or you could take the Brooklyn Bridge. That famous bridge opened in 1883. It was beautiful. It was amazing. But by 1895, it was packed, totally jammed. Thousands and thousands of people used it every single day. Too many people, way too many. Trains crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. Horse-drawn wagons crossed it. Regular people walked across it. Bicycles zipped back and forth. The bridge was so crowded that people sometimes waited an hour just to get on it. Meanwhile, New York was exploding with new people. In 1880, about 1.2 million people lived in Manhattan. By 1900, it was 1.8 million. By 1910, it would be 2.3 million. Where did all these people come from? Immigrants. Thousands of them arrived every single week. They came from Italy, Russia, Poland, Ireland, Germany, everywhere. These immigrants needed places to live. Manhattan was already packed. Apartments were tiny. Families of 8 or 10 people lived in 3 rooms. The Lower East Side of Manhattan became the most crowded place on earth, more crowded than anywhere in China, more crowded than anywhere in India. Brooklyn had more space. Brooklyn had cheaper apartments. Brooklyn had room to grow. But how could all these people get to Brooklyn if there was only one bridge and it was already too crowded? City leaders knew they needed another bridge. They needed it fast. In January 1895, the New York State Legislature said yes to a new bridge. They picked the location. It would connect the Lower East Side of Manhattan to the Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn. They picked the designer, a man named Leffert L. Buck. Buck was 50 years old. He had designed other bridges before. He was smart, experienced, and practical. City leaders told him, "Build us a bridge, make it big, make it strong. And make it cheap." That last part was important. Make it cheap. The Brooklyn Bridge cost $15.5 million to build. That was a lot of money in the 1870s and 1880s. City leaders didn't want to spend that much again. They wanted to save money. So Buck designed a bridge that would cost less. How? By using a different design, by buying cheaper materials, by hiring cheaper workers, by moving faster. The Brooklyn Bridge took 14 years to build. Buck promised to build the Williamsburg Bridge in just 7 years, half the time. How do you build a giant bridge in half the time? You work people harder. You work them longer hours. You skip some safety steps. You take risks. Buck didn't think about it that way, probably. He thought he was being efficient. He thought he was being smart. He was solving a problem. New York needed a bridge. He would give them a bridge. The city approved Buck's design in 1896. The budget was set at $22 million. Later, it would go up to $24 million, but that was still cheaper than the Brooklyn Bridge when you adjusted for inflation. Newspapers cheered. Politicians gave speeches. Everyone agreed. This bridge would help working people. It would help immigrants. It would help the poor families crowded into the Lower East Side. They called it the People's Bridge before a single piece of steel was in place. But here's what nobody asked. What about the people who would build it? What about their safety? What about their lives? In 1896, there were almost no safety laws for construction workers. No laws requiring hard hats. No laws requiring harnesses. No laws requiring safety training. No laws limiting work hours. If you got hurt on the job, that was your problem. The company didn't have to pay your medical bills. They didn't have to give you money if you couldn't work anymore. They didn't even have to tell your family if you died. This was normal. This was just how things worked. Leffert Buck knew his bridge would be dangerous to build. All bridges were dangerous. The Brooklyn Bridge killed at least 27 workers, probably more. That was just the cost of progress, people thought. Buck probably figured the Williamsburg Bridge would kill and injure some workers too, but that wasn't his main concern. His main concern was building the bridge on time and on budget. In spring of 1896, Buck hired the first crews. They arrived at the banks of the East River with their shovels and pickaxes. Most of them were fresh off the boat from Europe. Most of them were desperate for work. Most of them would do whatever the bosses told them to do, no matter how dangerous, because they needed the money. The vision was clear. Build a bridge to help the people. The reality would be different. Build a bridge on the people, on their backs, on their broken bones, on their graves. Chapter 2. The building begins. Digging the foundations. 950 words. The first job was the hardest job, the most dangerous job, digging the foundations. To build a bridge across a river, you need strong foundations. The towers have to stand on something solid. Otherwise, they'll sink or tip over. For the Williamsburg Bridge, that meant digging down through the riverbed. Digging down through mud and rock and garbage and who knows what else that had settled at the bottom of the East River for hundreds of years. But here's the problem. How do you dig a deep hole underwater? The answer: caissons. A caisson is like a giant upside-down box made of wood and iron. It's open at the bottom and closed at the top. Workers go inside the caisson. Air gets pumped in so they can breathe. The air pressure keeps the water from flooding in. The workers dig at the bottom, scooping out mud and rock. As they dig, the heavy caisson sinks deeper and deeper into the riverbed. It sounds simple. It's not simple. It's incredibly dangerous. The Brooklyn Bridge used caissons. 20 workers died from caisson disease, also called the bends. Many more got sick. The designer himself, Washington Roebling, got so sick from the bends that he was partially paralyzed for the rest of his life. Caisson disease happens when workers go from high air pressure, inside the caisson, to normal air pressure, outside, too quickly. Bubbles form in their blood. These bubbles can cause terrible pain, paralysis, or death. In 1896, doctors didn't really understand the bends. They didn't know how to prevent it or cure it. Leffert Buck knew about caisson disease. he decided to design his bridge foundations differently. He would still use caissons, but shallower ones. Less deep equals less air pressure equals less disease. That was the theory. Work on the Manhattan caisson started in June 1896. The caisson was enormous. 135 feet long and 95 feet wide. That's bigger than a basketball court. It weighed 3,000 tons. Building the caisson itself was dangerous. Workers had to fit together huge timbers, bolt on iron plates, and seal every crack. One mistake and water would flood in when they sank it. In September 1896, they floated the Manhattan caisson into position and started sinking it. A crew of about 50 men worked inside. They worked in shifts round the clock, 6 days a week, 12 hours at a time. Inside the caisson, it was like being in a cave, dark, even with electric lights. Loud because of the air pumps and the digging sounds, damp and cold. The air felt thick and weird because of the pressure. The workers were mostly Italian immigrants. They got paid $2.50 a day. That's about $85 in today's money. It sounds like decent pay, but remember, this was one of the most dangerous jobs in the city. Factory workers made about $1.50 a day and didn't risk dying every shift. The men dug with shovels and pickaxes. They filled buckets with mud and rocks. Other workers hauled the buckets up to the surface, hour after hour, day after day. On October 12, 1896, something went wrong. The air pressure inside the Manhattan caisson suddenly dropped. Workers couldn't breathe. They rushed for the exit. Some made it out. Some collapsed inside. 3 men got badly hurt. One, a 28-year-old man named Antonio Russo, couldn't move his legs anymore. The bends had paralyzed him. He never walked again. The newspapers barely mentioned it. One paragraph in the New York Times. That's all Antonio Russo got. Work continued. They fixed the air pressure problem and kept digging. By December 1896, they started work on the Brooklyn caisson, even bigger than the Manhattan one. 172 feet long and 102 feet wide. Heavier too, more men working inside, more danger. The Brooklyn caisson hit rock, hard rock. The workers had to use dynamite to blast through it. Think about that, setting off explosives in an enclosed space underground while sitting in compressed air. One mistake and the whole caisson could collapse, trapping everyone inside. In February 1897, the dynamite blasting caused a fire inside the Brooklyn caisson. Smoke filled the chamber. Workers scrambled for the exit in total darkness. The air locks jammed. Men were trapped. Bosses on the surface didn't know what to do. Do they flood the caisson to put out the fire? That would drown the workers inside. Do they pump in more air? That would feed the fire. They decided to pump in more air and hoped the workers could put out the fire from inside. Somehow they did. The workers grabbed buckets of water and threw them on the burning timbers. After 3 hours, the fire went out. Everyone got out alive. 4 men went to the hospital with burns and smoke damage. Their names were never recorded in any official document. The next day, the workers went back down. By summer 1897, both caissons reached their target depth. The Manhattan caisson went down 65 feet below the water line. The Brooklyn caisson went down 85 feet. They filled the caissons with concrete, millions of pounds of concrete. This created the solid foundations for the towers. During the caisson work, at least 2 men died, probably more. At least 15 suffered serious injuries, broken bones, crushed hands, the bends, burns. Dozens more had minor injuries that weren't recorded. The foundations were finished. The hardest part was done, everyone said. They were wrong. The truly deadly work was about to begin. Now came the towers, 2 massive towers of steel and stone, each one 335 feet tall. To build them, workers had to climb high into the air, climb on narrow platforms, climb on thin beams, climb in wind and rain and snow, and they had to do it without any safety equipment. No harnesses, no safety nets, no guardrails. If you fell, you died. That was the rule, the only rule. The towers started going up in fall 1897. First, workers built huge granite bases. They cut and shaped stones that weighed several tons each. They hoisted these stones with cranes and fitted them together like puzzle pieces. This work was dangerous too. A swinging stone could crush you. A cable could snap and whip across the work site, cutting a man in half. A crane could fail and drop tons of granite on whoever was below. In November 1897, a stone cutter named Patrick Morin was working on the Manhattan Tower base. A crane cable snapped. A 5-ton block of granite fell. Patrick tried to jump out of the way. He wasn't fast enough. The stone landed on his leg, crushing it. Other workers pulled him out. They carried him to the street. Someone ran to get a doctor. Patrick screamed the whole time. The doctor took one look at his leg and knew it had to come off. Patrick Morin was 34 years old. He had a wife and 3 children. After they amputated his leg, he couldn't work construction anymore. The city didn't pay him anything. The bridge company didn't pay him anything. His wife had to take in laundry to feed the family. The newspapers mentioned Patrick's accident in one sentence. The tower construction kept going. Once the granite bases were done, the steel work began. This was the most dangerous work of all. Steel workers were called riveters or bridgemen. They were considered the toughest workers in America. Building a bridge was the most dangerous job you could have. Being a riveter meant you were brave, strong, and maybe a little bit crazy. A riveting crew had 4 men. The heater, who heated rivets in a small forge until they glowed red-hot. The catcher, who caught the hot rivets when the heater threw them. The bucker-up, who held the rivet in place with a heavy tool. The riveter, who hammered the rivet flat. Here's how it worked. The heater would grab a rivet with tongs, heat it in the forge until it turned bright red, then throw it through the air to the catcher. The catcher would catch the red-hot rivet in a bucket or with tongs, then stick it in a hole in the steel. The bucker-up would hold it steady. The riveter would hammer it with a pneumatic hammer that shook your whole body. The rivet would cool and harden, holding the steel beams together. All of this happened on narrow platforms hundreds of feet in the air. The platforms swayed in the wind. The steel was slippery with grease. The rivets were so hot they could burn right through your clothes to your skin. Catching a red-hot rivet thrown through the air is incredibly difficult. If you miss, the rivet falls. If someone is below, it can kill them. If it hits the rivet catcher, it burns through his glove and melts his flesh. During the Williamsburg Bridge construction, rivet catchers got burned constantly. Degree burns on their hands were considered normal, just part of the job. Many catchers had permanently scarred, mangled hands. If a worker got burned, he went to see the company doctor. The doctor would put some ointment on it and send the worker back to work. If the burn was really bad, the worker got the rest of the day off. No pay for that day, though. The riveting crews worked from dawn until dark. In summer, that meant 12-hour days. In winter, it was still 10-hour days, 6 days a week, every week. They got paid by the rivet. The faster you worked, the more you made. A skilled riveting crew could drive 300 rivets in a day. That meant heating 300 rivets to glowing hot, throwing them through the air, catching them, and hammering them flat, all while standing on a platform the size of a dining room table, hundreds of feet above the ground. Speed meant money. Speed also meant danger. When you rush, you make mistakes. On March 15, 1899, a riveting crew was working on the Brooklyn Tower. They were about 200 feet up. The wind was blowing hard that day. The heater threw a rivet. The wind caught it. The rivet went wide. The catcher lunged for it. He missed. He lost his balance. He fell backwards off the platform. His name was Sean O'Brien. He was 23 years old. He'd been in America for 8 months. Sean fell 200 feet and hit the ground. He died instantly. Work stopped for 1 hour while they moved his body. Then the crews went back to work. Sean's family in Ireland never got his last wages. The company said he died because of his own carelessness. The towers kept rising, 10 feet per week, 20 feet per week, higher and higher. By the end of 1899, both towers were over 200 feet tall. You could see them from all over Manhattan and Brooklyn. People would gather to watch the workers climb around up there like ants on a hill. They thought it was amazing, exciting, progress. They didn't think about the men who fell, the men who got burned, the men who went home with broken bones and no paycheck. By spring 1900, both towers reached their full height, 335 feet. The workers who climbed to the very top could see the entire city spread out below them. Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, New Jersey, miles and miles of buildings and streets. They had built something incredible. And they had paid for it with their blood. With the towers finished, the next step was the cables. 4 massive cables would stretch from one side of the river to the other, passing over the tops of the towers. These cables would hold up the entire bridge. Each cable was made of thousands of thin steel wires bundled together. The process of making them was called cable spinning, and it was beautiful to watch but terrifying to do. Here's how cable spinning worked. First, workers strung a thin wire from the Manhattan side to the Brooklyn side over the tops of the towers. Then they attached this wire to a big wheel. The wheel would pull more wire across, back and forth, back and forth. Each trip across the river added 2 more wires to the bundle. After thousands of trips, you'd have a cable as thick as a tree trunk. The workers who did this were called cable runners or wire stringers. They walked on the thin wires as they were being strung. They walked 200 feet above the river with nothing but air below them. No safety ropes, no nets, just balance and courage. Cable spinning started in August 1900. The first workers to walk the cable were local men, Americans who'd done this work before on other bridges. The company paid them $4 a day. That's about $135 in today's money. Good pay, but you were betting your life every day. The cable runners became celebrities. People would gather to watch them. They would walk across the cable like tightrope walkers in a circus. Sometimes they'd wave to the crowds below. Sometimes they'd stop halfway across and eat their lunch, just sitting on the cable with their legs dangling 200 feet above the East River. Newspapers wrote about them like they were heroes, and in a way, they were. They were doing something most people couldn't even imagine doing, but the newspapers didn't write about the cable runners who fell. On October 8, 1900, a cable runner named James Murphy was walking the cable on a windy day. A gust of wind hit him. He lost his balance. He fell. James grabbed the cable as he fell. He hung on with both hands. He was dangling 200 feet above the water. People on both shores screamed. Other workers rushed out onto the cable to help him. James's hands were slipping. The cable was greasy with oil. He couldn't hold on much longer. Another cable runner, a man named Frank Harris, crawled out to where James was hanging. Frank lay down on the cable and reached down. He grabbed James's wrist. He tried to pull him up. The cable was too slippery. Frank couldn't get a good grip. James's hands were slipping more and more. James looked up at Frank. Then he looked down at the water. Then he let go. He fell 200 feet and hit the water. The impact was like hitting concrete. James Murphy died before anyone could pull him from the river. He was 29 years old. The next day, workers went back to spinning cable. Frank Harris went back to walking the cable. What else could he do? He needed the job. Cable spinning continued for more than a year. Back and forth, back and forth. By the time they finished in December 1901, the 4 main cables contained over 28,000 individual wires. Each cable was almost 19 inches in diameter. The total weight of the cable wire was over 8,000 tons. All that wire had to be hauled up the towers and strung across the river. All of it handled by men working hundreds of feet in the air. All of it dangerous. Falls weren't the only danger. The cable spinning machinery was dangerous too. The wheels that pulled the wire across were huge and powerful. If your hand got caught in one, it would pull your whole arm in and crush it. If a wire snapped under tension, it would whip through the air like a giant razor blade, cutting through anything in its path. In March 1901, a wire snapped on the Brooklyn side. It whipped across the work platform and hit a worker named Domenico Salerno. The wire was moving so fast it cut through his work coat, his shirt, and his skin. It left a gash across his chest 4 inches deep. Other workers grabbed him and tried to stop the bleeding. They called for a doctor. The company doctor arrived an hour later. By then, Domenico had lost so much blood he was barely conscious. They took him to the hospital. He survived, but he never worked again. The wound got infected. He spent months in the hospital. When he finally got out, he was too weak to do hard labor. The company paid his hospital bills, $47, that's all. After that, Domenico was on his own. He was 31 years old and could no longer support his family. Meanwhile, the bridge company hired a new worker to replace him. There were always more men willing to take the risk. By the end of 1901, the cable work was nearly done. The 4 great cables stretched across the river like steel rainbows. From these cables, workers would hang the vertical cables that would support the bridge deck. The hardest work was done, or so everyone thought, but there was still the deck to build, still the roadway to lay, still the train's tracks to install, and all of that work would be just as dangerous as what came before. The injuries kept happening, the deaths kept happening, nobody stopped to count them. Now the workers had to build the deck. The deck is the part you actually drive or walk on. It's the floor of the bridge. For the Williamsburg Bridge, the deck was going to be massive. It would have 8 lanes for different kinds of traffic. 2 outer lanes for trains, elevated trains called Ls. 2 inner lanes for streetcars, trolleys, 2 roadways for horses and wagons, later for cars, 2 walkways for people on foot. All of this had to be built, while hanging from cables 135 feet above the water. The deck was made of steel beams covered with wood. First, workers attached steel beams to the vertical cables. These beams ran from one side of the bridge to the other. Then they bolted more beams across these, creating a grid. Finally, they laid wooden planks on top. Every beam weighed hundreds of pounds. Some weighed thousands of pounds. Workers had to lift these beams with cranes, swing them into position, and bolt them in place. All while standing on platforms that swayed with every gust of wind. The deck work started in January 1902. They began in the middle and worked outward toward both shores. The work crews grew bigger. At the peak, over 500 men were working on the bridge at the same time. More workers meant more accidents. January 1902 was a brutal month. In the first week alone, 3 men fell from the deck. One survived with a broken back. One broke both legs. One died when he hit a barge in the river below. The man who died was named Yakov Bernstein. He was 19 years old. He'd been in America for 6 weeks. He'd been working on the bridge for 4 days. Yakov was carrying a steel beam with 3 other men. They were walking across a narrow plank. Someone shouted a warning about something. Yakov turned to look. He stepped off the plank. He fell. His family was still in Russia. They never found out what happened to him. As far as his family knew, Yakov just disappeared in America. The company foreman wrote in his report, "Worker fell, own fault." Careless, in February 1902, the riveting crews started working on the deck. Remember, riveting meant throwing red-hot metal through the air and hammering it in place. Now they were doing this while standing on a half-finished deck that was swinging in the wind. Burns became epidemic. The company doctor treated over 40 serious burns in February alone. Workers with burned hands couldn't grip tools properly. That made them more likely to drop things. That made other workers more likely to get hit by falling objects. A falling rivet sounds small, but a red-hot rivet falling from 50 feet up can go right through a man's skull. It happened on March 3, 1902. A rivet fell from the upper deck, went through a worker's cloth cap, and buried itself in his brain. He died 3 days later. His name was never recorded. Meanwhile, the work got faster. The company wanted to open the bridge on time. The original plan said the bridge would open in 1903. It was already 1902. They had to hurry. Faster work meant more danger. Workers had to rush, had to take shortcuts, had to work longer hours. In April 1902, the company extended the workday to 13 hours. 13 hours of climbing, lifting, carrying, riveting, welding. 13 hours standing on narrow beams high above the water. 13 hours with no safety equipment. Tired workers make mistakes. Tired workers fall. In May 1902, 4 workers fell in 1 week. 2 died. 2 survived but couldn't work anymore. One of the survivors was an Irish man named Liam O'Connor. He was 42 years old and had been a bridge worker for 20 years. He'd worked on bridges in Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. He knew what he was doing. He was careful. But on May 17, 1902, he was too tired. He'd been working 13-hour days for 6 weeks straight. He stepped on a loose plank. It shifted under his weight. He fell 90 feet and landed on a lower section of the deck. The fall shattered both his legs, broke his pelvis, and cracked 3 ribs. He survived. But he never walked without crutches again. Liam had a wife and 5 children. After his accident, he couldn't work. His family had no money. His wife tried to get compensation from the bridge company. The company said no. Liam fell because he was careless, they said. Not our responsibility. Liam's family ended up in a poorhouse, a place where poor people lived when they had nowhere else to go. All 5 children grew up in the poorhouse because their father fell building the People's Bridge. The deck work continued through summer and fall of 1902. By December, most of the deck was finished. Workers could walk from Manhattan to Brooklyn on the bridge, even though the bridge wasn't officially open yet. Sometimes, late at night after work, a few workers would walk across just to say they did it. They'd walk across the bridge they built. They'd look down at the city lights reflecting in the river. They'd think about the friends they lost. The bridge was almost done. Just a few more months of finishing work, installing the trolley tracks, setting up the lights, painting the steel. Just a few more months, just a few more injuries, just a few more deaths, and then everyone could celebrate. Early 1903. The bridge was almost ready. Most of the big construction was done. Now came the finishing touches, painting. Electrical work, installing rails for the trolleys, setting up lights, building the approach roads on both sides. All the little details that turn a steel skeleton into a working bridge. This work seemed safer. You weren't working as high up. You weren't catching red-hot rivets. You weren't walking on cables, but it was still dangerous. The painting crews had to cover the entire bridge with protective paint to keep the steel from rusting. That meant climbing all over the bridge with buckets of paint and brushes. It meant hanging from ropes or standing on narrow ledges. It meant breathing in paint fumes all day long. The paint they used was lead-based. Lead paint is poisonous. Breathing it in day after day can make you sick, can damage your brain, can kill you slowly. The painters were mostly Italian immigrants. They got paid $2 a day. They worked 6 days a week. Many of them started feeling sick after a few weeks. Headaches, stomach pain, weakness. They didn't know it was the lead poisoning them. They thought they just had the flu. One painter, Giuseppe Romano, got so sick he couldn't stand up. He collapsed at work in February 1903. They took him to the hospital. He died 4 days later. The doctors said it was brain fever. They didn't know about lead poisoning. Giuseppe was 26 years old. Meanwhile, electricians were installing lights. The Williamsburg Bridge would be the first bridge in the world to have electric lights all along its length. Hundreds of lights. It would be spectacular at night. But running electrical wire in 1903 was dangerous work. The insulation on wires wasn't very good. If you touched the wrong wire, you could get shocked. A bad shock could stop your heart. On March 14, 1903, an electrician named Thomas Keating was connecting wires inside one of the towers. He touched a live wire. 2,000 volts of electricity shot through his body. Other workers heard him scream and found him unconscious. They tried to revive him, but he was already dead. Thomas was 33 years old and had a wife and 2 children. The company called it an accident. Said Thomas should have been more careful, didn't pay his family anything. The approach roads were being built on both sides of the river. On the Brooklyn side, workers had to build a long ramp leading up to the bridge. This meant digging into the neighborhood, moving earth, pouring concrete. Heavy machinery was involved, steam shovels, cement mixers, pile drivers. All of this machinery was dangerous. No safety guards, no warning systems. If you got too close to a moving part, it would pull you in and crush you. In April 1903, a worker named Samuel Cohen was standing too close to a pile driver. A pile driver is a machine that hammers huge wooden posts into the ground. It lifts a heavy weight up high and then drops it, over and over. Slam, slam, slam. Samuel didn't hear someone shout a warning. The pile driver's cable snapped. The heavy weight fell sideways and hit Samuel, crushed his chest. He died within minutes. He was 44 years old. As the opening day got closer, the company pushed the workers harder. They wanted everything perfect for the big celebration. Every light working, every rail polished, every cable painted. Workers put in 14-hour days. Some worked 7 days a week. They were exhausted, and exhausted workers make fatal mistakes. On November 2, 1903, just 6 weeks before the opening, a carpenter named John Walsh was installing wooden planks on the walkway. He was tired. He'd been working since 6 in the morning. It was now 8 at night. He'd been on his feet for 14 hours. John was hammering a plank into place. He took a step backwards to look at his work. He forgot he was standing at the edge of the deck. He stepped back into empty space. He fell 135 feet into the East River. Other workers saw him fall. They ran to the edge. They looked down. John hit the water and didn't come up. The current pulled him under. They never found his body. John Walsh was the last worker to die building the Williamsburg Bridge, or at least, he was the last one whose death was recorded. He was 38 years old. How many workers really died building this bridge? The official count was 6. But that's just the deaths that made it into company records. What about the workers who died later from injuries? What about the painters who died from lead poisoning? What about the caisson workers who died from the bends? We'll never know the real number, probably at least a dozen, possibly more, and how many were seriously injured. The official count was over 100, but again, that's just what was recorded. Probably the real number was much higher. Probably hundreds of men went home with broken bones, crushed hands, burned skin, damaged lungs. The bridge was ready. The celebration could begin. December 19, 1903, opening day. The weather was cold and clear. Snow had fallen the night before, making everything look clean and white. Perfect conditions for a celebration. The city planned a huge event. Politicians would give speeches. Bands would play music. Fireworks would light up the sky. Thousands of people would be there. Mayor Seth Low arrived at 1 p.m. He wore a long black coat and a top hat. Behind him came dozens of other important men, city commissioners, business leaders, wealthy donors. All men, all white, all rich. Behind them came the crowd. Thousands and thousands of regular people, working people, immigrant families. The people who supposedly the bridge was built for. They called it the People's Bridge, remember. But where were the people who actually built it? Where were the riveters? Where were the cable runners? Where were the painters and the carpenters and the stone cutters? A few were in the crowd. Most stayed home. They weren't invited to stand on the platform with the mayor. Nobody asked them to give speeches. Nobody thanked them by name. The workers who did show up stood in the crowd like everyone else. They watched the mayor cut a ribbon. They watched the rich people applaud each other. They watched the first trolley car roll across the bridge, carrying politicians and reporters. Did anyone mention the 6 men who died? Did anyone mention the 100 who were seriously injured? Did anyone mention Giuseppe Morty, or Sean O'Brien, or James Murphy, or Yakov Bernstein, or Thomas Keating, or John Walsh? No, Mayor Low gave a speech. He talked about progress. He talked about engineering. He talked about how the bridge would help working families get to jobs. He talked about connecting communities. He said, "This bridge represents the triumph of American ingenuity and hard work." He didn't say whose hard work. He didn't say whose broken bones. He didn't say whose blood. The newspapers the next day were full of praise. A marvel of engineering. The People's Bridge opens. Modern wonder connects Manhattan and Brooklyn. The New York Times ran a long article about the bridge's technical details. How long it was, how much it weighed, how much it cost. They mentioned that it was built for $24 million under the original budget estimate. Saved money. Good for taxpayers. The article didn't mention that they saved money by hiring cheap immigrant labor. Didn't mention that they saved money by skipping safety equipment. Didn't mention that they saved money by working men to death. The Brooklyn Eagle ran a story with pictures of the celebration. Rich ladies in fancy dresses, men in top hats. The mayor smiling. One small paragraph at the end mentioned the brave workers who built this magnificent structure. That was it. One paragraph. No names. Meanwhile, in a tenement apartment on the Lower East Side, Yakov Bernstein's roommates didn't know whether to celebrate. The bridge was open. They could now walk to Brooklyn easily, but every time they'd cross it, they'd think about Yakov falling into the river. In Brooklyn, Liam O'Connor sat in a chair and watched the celebration from his window. He couldn't walk to the bridge. His shattered legs never healed right. He needed crutches to move around. He lived in pain every day. He watched the fireworks light up the sky that night. He thought about the 20 years he spent building bridges. He thought about his 5 children growing up in a poorhouse because he fell. He thought about the company saying it wasn't their responsibility. In the Bronx, Antonio Russo's wife pushed him in a wheelchair. Antonio was the caisson worker who got paralyzed in 1896. 7 years later, he still couldn't walk. His wife worked as a laundress, washing other people's clothes for pennies. They barely survived. The People's Bridge was open, but it sure didn't help people like Antonio. That first day, December 19, 1903, over 150,000 people crossed the bridge. They walked across. They took trolleys. They rode in horse-drawn wagons. They marveled at the electric lights. They looked down at the river. It was spectacular. It really was. The Williamsburg Bridge was an amazing achievement. It was beautiful. It was huge. It was exactly what New York needed. But here's what nobody wanted to talk about: the cost. Not the dollar cost, the human cost. At least 6 men died, over 100 seriously injured, hundreds more with minor injuries. Thousands of workers breathing in bad air, getting burned, working in pain, going home exhausted every single day for 7 years. And what did they get for it? The workers who survived got their wages, $2 or $3 or $4 a day, depending on the job. When the bridge was finished, their jobs ended. Most of them had to find new work. Many of them had permanent injuries that made it hard to work. The workers who died got nothing. Their families got nothing. No life insurance, no compensation, no apology. Meanwhile, the city officials and the rich men who funded the bridge got their names in the newspapers, got credit for a great achievement, got to stand on the platform and wave while people cheered. Leffert Buck, the chief engineer, became famous. Other cities hired him to design their bridges. He made a lot of money. He lived until 1922, dying peacefully at age 77. Most of the workers who built the bridge. We don't even know their names. The bridge opened. The celebration happened. And then everyone forgot about the men who built it. Everyone except their families. The Williamsburg Bridge changed New York City almost immediately. Before the bridge, the Lower East Side was one of the most crowded places on earth. Families packed into tiny apartments. 8, 9, 10 people in 3 rooms. Buildings so close together you couldn't see the sky. Streets so crowded you could barely walk. After the bridge opened, people could move to Brooklyn. Brooklyn had more space, bigger apartments, lower rent, fresh air. Thousands of families crossed the Williamsburg Bridge and never came back. They moved to Williamsburg, to Bedford-Stuyvesant, to other Brooklyn neighborhoods. They found apartments with 4 or 5 rooms instead of 2 or 3. They found neighborhoods where children could play outside. The bridge made this possible. Every day, the bridge carried thousands of people. In 1905, an average of 200,000 people used it daily. By 1910, it was 300,000 people per day. The trolley cars ran constantly. Back and forth, back and forth. Every few minutes, another trolley. Workers going to jobs, children going to school, families going to visit relatives. The elevated trains started running in 1908. Now you could take a train from Manhattan to Brooklyn in just a few minutes, faster than a ferry, cheaper than a taxi. The working class finally had quick, cheap transportation. The bridge became the heart of the city. It connected communities. It helped immigrants build better lives. It really was the People's Bridge in that way. But the bridge also had problems from the very beginning. First problem, it was already too crowded. By 1910, just 7 years after opening, the bridge carried more traffic than it was designed to handle. The trolleys were packed. The walkways were jammed. The roadways were clogged with horses and wagons and the new automobiles. Second problem, it needed constant maintenance. All that cheap construction, all those shortcuts, all that rush to finish on time, it showed. The bridge needed repairs constantly. The wooden deck started rotting. The cables needed adjustment. The paint peeled off and the steel started rusting. The electrical system had problems. Every year, the city had to spend money fixing things, replacing parts, repainting, reinforcing weak spots. In 1912, engineers inspected the bridge carefully. Their report was alarming. The bridge had serious structural problems. Some of the steel members were cracking under the stress. Some of the cable connections were loose. The foundation on the Brooklyn side had settled unevenly, making the whole bridge slightly tilted. The engineers recommended major repairs. The city delayed. Too expensive, they said. maybe next year. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Something nobody predicted in 1903, cars. When the Williamsburg Bridge opened, there were only a few hundred cars in all of New York City. Most people traveled by horse, by trolley, or on foot. But cars became popular fast, really fast. By 1915, there were tens of thousands of cars in the city. By 1920, hundreds of thousands. By 1930, over a million. All these cars needed roads. They needed bridges. The Williamsburg Bridge wasn't designed for car traffic. It was designed for horses and trolleys, but cars took over anyway. They pushed the horses aside. They filled the roadways. They made the bridge even more crowded. The weight of all these cars stressed the bridge. The vibrations from their engines shook the structure. The bridge wasn't built for this. More problems developed, more repairs needed, more money spent. But here's the thing about the Williamsburg Bridge. Despite all its problems, despite all the shortcuts and the cheap construction, it didn't fall down. It kept standing. It kept working. The workers who built it, who died building it, who got injured building it, they did their jobs well. The steel they placed was strong. The rivets they drove held firm. The cables they strung stayed tight. The bridge survived because of their skill, not because of good management or careful planning. The workers made it work despite everything. Meanwhile, the city grew around the bridge. Williamsburg transformed from a quiet neighborhood to a bustling urban area. Factories opened. Businesses grew. Apartment buildings went up. The bridge made all of this possible. Goods could move across the river easily. Workers could commute quickly. The economy grew. By 1920, the Williamsburg Bridge was one of the busiest bridges in the world. It carried more people and more vehicles than almost any other bridge anywhere. It was a success. A genuine success. It really did help working people. It really did connect communities. It really did make the city better. But at what price? In 1923, the city did a study. They looked at the cost of building and maintaining the Williamsburg Bridge over its first 20 years. The original construction cost $24 million. The repairs and maintenance over 20 years cost another $8 million. Total, $32 million. The Brooklyn Bridge cost $15.5 million to build in the 1870s and 1880s. Maintenance over the same period cost about $2 million. Total, $17.5 million. The cheap bridge ended up costing almost twice as much as the more expensive bridge, and that's just the money. That doesn't count the human cost, the deaths, the injuries, the ruined lives. Was it worth it? That depends on who you ask. If you ask the hundreds of thousands of people who use the bridge every day, who moved to better apartments, who got to better jobs, they'd probably say yes. If you ask Liam O'Connor, sitting in his wheelchair, if you ask Antonio Russo's wife, washing clothes for pennies, if you ask the families of the men who died, they might have a different answer. What happened to the men who built the Williamsburg Bridge after the construction ended? Most of them moved on to other jobs, other bridges, other buildings, other dangerous construction sites. Being a bridge worker in the early 1900s meant moving from job to job. You'd work on a bridge for a few months or a few years. Then the bridge would be done. Then you'd move to the next city, the next project. Many of the men who worked on the Williamsburg Bridge went on to build other famous bridges. The Queensboro Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Hell Gate Bridge. All across America, from New York to San Francisco, bridge workers traveled looking for work. And they kept dying, they kept getting injured, because nothing changed. After the Williamsburg Bridge, there were no new safety laws, no requirements for harnesses or hard hats, no workers' compensation, no insurance. If you got hurt, too bad. If you died, your family got nothing. This continued for decades. It wasn't until the 1930s that things really started to change. During the Great Depression, workers organized into unions. They demanded better conditions. They demanded safety equipment. They demanded compensation for injuries. The Bridge Workers Union became one of the strongest unions in America. They fought for every safety rule we have today. Hard hats, harnesses, safety nets, medical insurance, death benefits for families. Why did it take so long? Why did thousands of men have to die first? Because the men who built the bridges had no power. They were mostly immigrants. They didn't speak English well. They didn't know their rights. They were desperate for work. They'd take any job, no matter how dangerous. The companies knew this. The city knew this. They took advantage of it. But let's go back to some specific workers from the Williamsburg Bridge. What happened to them? Frank Harris, the cable runner who tried to save James Murphy when he was hanging from the cable. Frank kept working on bridges until 1915. Then he fell from the Manhattan Bridge and broke his back. He survived but couldn't work anymore. He spent the last 20 years of his life in poverty. He died in 1935 at age 63. Patrick Moran, the stone cutter who lost his leg in 1897, Patrick's wife, left him a few years after the accident. She couldn't support the family on her own. The children went to live with relatives. Patrick ended up living in a boarding house for disabled men. He died in 1920 at age 57. Liam O'Connor, who fell in 1902 and shattered his legs. Liam never worked again. His wife took in laundry. His children grew up in a poorhouse. When they became adults, they didn't speak to him anymore. They blamed him for their terrible childhood. Liam died alone in 1928. Antonio Russo, paralyzed by the bends in 1896, Antonio lived for 23 more years in a wheelchair. His wife supported him by working as a cleaning woman. She worked until she was 70 years old. Antonio died in 1919. His wife died 2 months later, probably from exhaustion. These men gave their bodies to build the bridge. The bridge gave them nothing back, but some workers did okay. Some survived without major injuries. Some saved their money. Some started their own businesses. There was a riveter named Giovanni Castellano who worked on the Williamsburg Bridge from 1899 to 1903. He was one of the skilled workers who got paid $4 a day. He was careful. He was lucky. He never got seriously hurt. After the bridge was done, Giovanni used his savings to open a small construction company. He hired other Italian immigrants. He did well. He built apartment buildings in Brooklyn. He made enough money to bring his whole family over from Italy. His children went to school. His grandchildren went to college. Giovanni died in 1948 at age 79, a successful businessman. When he died, the obituary in the Brooklyn Eagle mentioned that he helped build the Williamsburg Bridge. His family was proud of that. But for every Giovanni, there were 10 Liams or Antonios. For every success story, there were many more stories of broken bodies and broken lives. The workers who died, their families struggled. Most fell into poverty. The children often had to quit school and start working at age 10 or 12. The widows often remarried quickly out of desperation, just to have someone to support them. One widow, Maria O'Brien, Sean O'Brien's wife, he fell from the tower in 1899, had 3 children under age 5 when Sean died. She tried to support them by sewing clothes at home. She couldn't make enough. 2 of her children died of disease before they turned 10, probably because they were malnourished and living in a terrible apartment. Maria eventually remarried, but she never got over losing Sean and then losing 2 of their children. She died in 1915 at age 41. The death certificate said heart failure, but really she died of a broken heart. This is the hidden cost of the Williamsburg Bridge. Not just the 6 or 12 or however many men who died during construction, but the dozens of families destroyed afterward, the children who grew up in poverty, the widows who worked themselves to death, the injured men who died young from complications. If you count all of that, all the ripple effects, the bridge probably affected hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. Also, people could get from Manhattan to Brooklyn a little faster. Was it worth it? I don't know. I can't answer that. Maybe there's no good answer. The bridge exists. It's still there. People still use it. That's real. That matters. But the cost was real too, and we should remember that. Jump forward to the 1950s. The Williamsburg Bridge is 50 years old. It looks terrible. The paint is peeling off in huge sheets. The steel underneath is rusty and brown. Some of the cables are fraying. The deck is full of holes. The concrete is crumbling. The bridge is falling apart. Why? Because of how it was built. All those shortcuts in the 1890s, all that cheap construction, all that rush to finish on time. It was all catching up. The Williamsburg Bridge was designed to last 100 years with minimal maintenance, but it needed way more than minimal maintenance. It needed constant attention, constant repairs. And for decades, it didn't get enough. The city was always broke, always had other priorities, always put off repairs until next year, and the next year, and the next year. By 1950, the bridge was in serious trouble. Engineers did an inspection in 1952. Their report was scary. They found cracks in major steel members. They found cables that had lost 20% of their strength. They found areas where the deck was sagging. They found rust holes completely through some beams. The engineers said, "This bridge needs major repairs immediately. If we don't fix it soon, it could become unsafe." The city said, "We don't have the money right now." They did some small repairs, patched the worst holes, replaced a few cables, painted some of the steel, but they didn't do the big work, the expensive work, the necessary work. The bridge kept deteriorating. By the 1960s, it was worse, much worse. The city had to put weight limits on the bridge. No heavy trucks allowed, only cars and buses. Even with the weight limits, pieces of concrete sometimes fell off the bridge onto the street below. Or into the river. Nobody got killed, but it was close a few times. In 1963, a chunk of concrete the size of a basketball fell from the bridge and crashed through the windshield of a car driving underneath. The driver survived but was badly cut by broken glass. He sued the city. The city settled for $10,000. A month later, another piece fell, then another. then another. The city put up nets underneath parts of the bridge to catch falling debris, but nets don't fix the problem. They just hide it. By the 1970s, the Williamsburg Bridge was considered one of the most dangerous bridges in America. Engineers said it was amazing the bridge was still standing at all. In 1988, the city closed the bridge completely. Too dangerous. They needed to do massive repairs. The repairs took 7 years. 7 years. Almost as long as it took to build the bridge in the first place. During those 7 years, engineers basically rebuilt huge sections of the bridge. They replaced cables. They replaced steel beams. They rebuilt the deck. They rebuilt the approach roads. It cost $600 million. That's in 1990s money. Adjusted for inflation to today's dollars, that's over $1.3 billion. Remember, the bridge originally cost $24 million to build. That's $850 million in today's money. So the repairs cost more than it cost to build the bridge in the first place. And even after spending $600 million, the bridge still had problems. The work they did fixed the worst issues, but the bridge still needed constant maintenance, still needed constant attention. By 2003, 100 years after opening, the bridge needed even more repairs, another $800 million worth. By 2020, engineers estimated the bridge had cost over $2 billion in total repairs since it opened. The cheap bridge wasn't cheap at all. If they had spent more money building it right the first time using better materials, better construction methods, more careful work, they would have saved billions in the long run. But nobody thought about the long run in 1896. They thought about the short run, about opening the bridge quickly, about saving money now. And here's another thing, all those repairs took time, years and years of time. During that time, the bridge was partially closed or had reduced capacity. That meant traffic jams. That meant delays. That meant hundreds of thousands of people inconvenienced. What's the cost of that? How do you measure the cost of millions of hours lost in traffic, of people late to work, of businesses affected? You can't really measure it, but it's real. The Williamsburg Bridge is still standing today, still functioning. People still use it every day. Over 200,000 vehicles cross it daily, plus trains, plus pedestrians, plus cyclists. It's a vital part of New York's infrastructure. The city can't function without it. But it's still a problem, still needs constant maintenance, still costs millions of dollars every year to keep safe. In 2023, engineers did another major inspection. They found more problems, more cracks, more rust, more deterioration. They estimated it would cost another $500 million to fix everything. The city approved $300 million, said they'd figure out the rest later. That's always how it goes with the Williamsburg Bridge. Never quite enough money, never quite enough attention, always putting off the big work until later. Meanwhile, the bridge keeps standing, keeps working, despite everything. You know why? Because the workers who built it did good work, despite the terrible conditions, despite the lack of safety equipment, despite being rushed, despite everything. Those riveters who caught red-hot metal and hammered it in place, they did it right. Those cable spinners who walked across thin wires, they did it right. Those stone cutters who shaped the foundation blocks, they did it right. The bridge is still there because of their skill, because of their effort, because of their blood. They built it to last. Even though the people who hired them built it cheap. Today, in 2024, the Williamsburg Bridge is 121 years old. It's one of the oldest major bridges in New York City. Every day, thousands of people use it without thinking about its history. They drive across in their cars, listening to music or talking on the phone. They ride the train, looking at their phones. They walk across, enjoying the view of Manhattan's skyline. How many of them know about the men who died building it? How many know about the 100+ injuries? How many know about the cheap construction and the costly repairs? Almost none. For most people, the bridge is just there. It's infrastructure. It's part of the city. Like the streets or the buildings or the subway, just something that exists. But the bridge is more than that. It's a monument built on bones and blood. Let me tell you what the bridge means today. First, it's a reminder of the cost of progress. We love progress. We love new buildings, new bridges, new technology. We love things that make life better, but progress always has a cost. Often that cost is paid by the people with the least power, the workers, the immigrants, the poor. The Williamsburg Bridge shows us that cost, if we pay attention. Second, it's a reminder of why we have safety laws. Today, construction sites have strict safety rules. Workers have to wear hard hats and harnesses. Companies have to provide safety training. There are inspectors who check that everyone follows the rules. Why do we have these rules? Because thousands of workers died before we did. Workers like the ones who built the Williamsburg Bridge. Their deaths taught us that we needed laws. Their blood bought our safety regulations. Third, it's a reminder that cheap isn't always cheap. The city thought they were saving money by building the bridge cheaply, but they ended up spending way more in repairs. If they had built it right the first time, they would have saved billions. This lesson applies to everything. Cheap products that break quickly cost more than quality products that last. Cheap solutions that create problems cost more than good solutions that work. We keep forgetting this lesson. We keep choosing cheap over quality, over and over. Fourth, it's a reminder that we forget the people who build things. We remember the designers. We remember the engineers. We remember the politicians who cut the ribbons. We put their names on plaques, but we forget the workers, the people who actually did the building, the people who risked their lives. How many people can name Leffert Buck, the chief engineer of the Williamsburg Bridge? Probably a few dozen, mostly historians and bridge enthusiasts. How many people can name any of the workers who built it? Almost nobody, maybe nobody. We've forgotten them, erased them, like they never existed. Fifth, it's a reminder that things can change. Working conditions for construction workers were terrible in 1900. No safety equipment, no insurance, no rights. Today, things are better. Not perfect, but better. Construction workers have unions, they have safety equipment, they have some legal protections. Things changed because workers fought for change, because unions organized, because laws were passed. Change is possible, but it takes work. It takes time, it takes people standing up and demanding better. The Williamsburg Bridge is still beautiful in its way. Stand on the pedestrian walkway on a clear day. Look at the cables sweeping up to the towers. Look at the river below. Look at the city spread out around you. It's impressive, it's powerful, it makes you feel small. And maybe, if you know the history, it makes you feel something else too. Sadness for the men who died, anger at the system that killed them. Gratitude that things are better now, determination to make sure they keep getting better. The bridge connects Brooklyn and Manhattan, but it also connects us to the past. It connects us to the people who built this city with their hands and their bodies. Every bridge, every building, every road, somebody built it. Usually lots of somebodies, usually working in dangerous conditions, usually not getting paid enough, usually not being remembered. The Williamsburg Bridge is special because we know some of its story. We know about the injuries and deaths. We know about the cheap construction. We know about the costly repairs. Most infrastructure, we don't know the story. We don't know who built it. We don't know what it cost them. But the story is always there. Always. Today, the Williamsburg Bridge is undergoing another round of repairs. They're replacing more cables, fixing more cracks, painting more steel. The workers doing this are mostly union members now. They have good wages. They have health insurance. They have safety equipment. If something goes wrong, there are systems to help them. This is progress, real progress. It came from the sacrifices of workers like the ones who built the bridge in the first place. Sometimes I wonder, what would Giuseppe Morti think if he could see the bridge today? He fell from the Brooklyn Tower in 1900 and died. He was 24 years old. Would he be proud that the bridge is still standing? Would he be angry that it took 100 years and billions of dollars to maintain? Would he be glad that working conditions improved for future workers? I think maybe all of those things. The bridge is his monument, him and all the others who built it. Their blood is in the steel. Their bones are in the foundations. Their lives are in every cable and beam. We should remember that. We should honor that. Not just with words, but with action. By protecting workers today. By building things right. By valuing people over profits. That would be the best way to honor the men who built the Williamsburg Bridge. Let me tell you about a day in June 2018. It's a sunny afternoon. Hundreds of people are walking across the Williamsburg Bridge. Joggers, cyclists, tourists taking pictures, regular people going about their business. Nobody's thinking about the history. Nobody's thinking about the men who died, except one person. An old woman stands at the Manhattan end of the bridge. She's 89 years old. Her name is Sofia Castellano. She's Giovanni Castellano's granddaughter. Remember Giovanni, the riveter who worked on the bridge from 1899 to 1903, the one who survived and started his own construction company. Sofia is here because her grandfather told her stories when she was little, stories about building the bridge, about catching red-hot rivets, about friends who fell, about working in freezing cold and blazing heat, about being scared every single day but doing the work anyway. Giovanni died when Sofia was 9 years old, but she never forgot his stories. Now she's 89, and she wanted to see the bridge one more time. Her grandson brought her. He's pushing her wheelchair. Sofia looks up at the towers. She thinks about her grandfather climbing those towers when he was a young man, when he was strong and brave and had no idea he'd live to be 79. When he thought any day might be his last. "Nonno built this," she says to her grandson. "My grandfather built this." Her grandson nods. He's heard the stories before, but he likes hearing them again. "He told me they threw the rivets," Sofia says. "Threw them through the air when they were still red hot. Can you imagine? Catching a piece of metal that could burn your hand to the bone?" She shakes her head. He said men died, lots of men. He saw a man fall from the tower, saw him hit the ground, said he never forgot the sound. She's quiet for a moment, but he was also proud, she continues, proud that he built something important, something that would last, something that would help people. She looks at all the people using the bridge, cars driving across, trains rumbling overhead, people walking and biking. It did help people, she says. It really did. Then she's quiet again. But the cost, she finally says, nobody talks about the cost. This is the question we have to ask ourselves. What are we willing to pay for progress? The Williamsburg Bridge helped millions of people. It connected communities. It helped immigrants build better lives. It helped the city grow. It's still helping people today, 121 years later. That's real, that's important, that matters. But 6 men died building it, probably more. Over 100 were seriously injured. Hundreds more were hurt in ways that didn't get recorded. Families were destroyed. Lives were ruined. That's real too. That's important. That matters too. Can both things be true? Can the bridge be both a success and a tragedy? Can it be both a monument to progress and a monument to exploitation? Yes, both things can be true. This is what history is: complicated, messy, full of contradictions. The men who built the Williamsburg Bridge were exploited. They were treated as disposable. They were worked too hard, paid too little, given no protection, and forgotten when they died. That's true, but they also built something amazing. Something beautiful, something that lasted, something that helped millions of people. That's also true. We can honor them by remembering both truths, not just the happy story, not just the sad story, the whole story. Here's what I want you to think about. Right now, today, people are building things. Buildings, bridges, roads, tunnels, all over America, all over the world. Are they safe? Are they treated well? Are they paid fairly? Are they protected? Some are. Some aren't. We've made progress since 1900. We really have. We have safety laws now. We have unions. We have workers' compensation. We have regulations, but we're not done. We can't be done because people are still getting hurt. People are still dying. Maybe not as many as in 1900, but still too many. Every construction worker who dies because of unsafe conditions is another Giuseppe or Sean or James or Yakov, another person with a family, another person with dreams, another person who deserved better. In 2022, over 1,000 construction workers died on the job in the United States. 1,000 in 1 year. In a country with all our safety laws and regulations, 1,000 families destroyed, 1,000 funerals, 1,000 people who went to work one day and never came home. How many of them do we remember? How many do we even hear about? Almost none. Just like we don't remember the men who built the Williamsburg Bridge. This has to change. We have to remember that every building, every bridge, every road was built by people. Real people, people with names and families and lives. We have to demand better safety, better protections, better pay, better treatment. We have to stop choosing cheap over safe. Stop choosing fast over careful. Stop choosing profit over people. This is the lesson of the Williamsburg Bridge. This is what we should learn from its dark story. Not that progress is bad. Progress is good. Building things is good. Making the city better is good. But we have to do it right. We have to protect the people who do the work. We have to value their lives. If we can't build a bridge without killing people, maybe we shouldn't build the bridge. Or maybe we should wait until we can figure out how to build it safely. I know that sounds extreme, but is it? Is it really extreme to say that human lives are more important than infrastructure, more important than convenience? More important than money? I don't think so. Here's a question for you. Next time you cross a bridge, will you think about who built it? Will you wonder if they made it home safe each night? Will you wonder if they were treated well? You should. We all should, because they're the reason the bridge is there. Not the politicians who gave speeches, not the rich people who funded it, not the engineers who designed it, the workers, the people who actually did the building. They're the reason you can cross the river without taking a boat. The Williamsburg Bridge is still there, still standing, still serving the city. It's stained with blood, built on broken bones, raised with the lives of men whose names we've forgotten. But it's also a triumph, a marvel of engineering, a connection between communities, a path to better lives for millions of people. Both things are true. Both things will always be true. The question is, what do we do with this knowledge? Do we just shrug and say, that's how things were back then? Do we forget and move on? Or do we remember? Do we honor the sacrifice? Do we commit to doing better? I hope we choose to remember. I hope we choose to honor them. I hope we choose to do better. Because if we forget, if we just drive across our bridges and walk into our buildings without thinking about who built them and what it cost, then we'll keep making the same mistakes. We'll keep treating workers as disposable. We'll keep choosing cheap over safe. We'll keep forgetting the people who build our world, and more people will die, more families will be destroyed, more names will be forgotten. The Williamsburg Bridge is a warning, a reminder, a lesson written in steel and blood. The question is, are we paying attention? Next time you cross the Williamsburg Bridge or any bridge, look up. Look at the towers. Look at the cables. Look at all that steel and stone, and think about the hands that placed it, the hands that riveted it, the hands that shaped it. Think about Giuseppe, about Sean, about James, about Yakov, about Thomas, about John. Think about the 100 others whose names we don't even know. They built this for us, with their sweat, with their blood, sometimes with their lives. The least we can do is remember them. The least we can do is honor them by protecting the workers who build things today. The least we can do is learn from their sacrifice. That's the dark story of the Williamsburg Bridge. It's a story of exploitation and progress, of tragedy and triumph, of forgotten lives and lasting achievement. It's a story that should never be forgotten. Will you remember it?